sitting in Boise, Idaho, 20 years later, with these fans and fans all over the world watching this, what would you have said?
I would have said you were crazy. I mean, being here in Boise with all my best friends, watching this movie right now, I wouldn't have believed you. But actually, what's kind of amazing is my 14-year-old son, Tucker, he's watched the movie for the first time tonight. Which I was most nervous about. I'll get the critique from you later, Tucker. But this is very special for me that you guys are here sharing it with him for the first time. So this is pretty awesome.
As I said in the beginning, I've watched this movie many, many times, and it gets me every time. And I told my wife, we were sitting in the back, and again for the little ones, I apologize. But when they went to the house, I said, that fucking house. Every time I hate that house. Right? I can live with everything up to that point, but that house. But I have a question. So in the beginning of the movie, before the first strange noise, before any bumps in the night, before any rock formations, any twigs show up outside of the tent, the team starts to lose faith in each other. The trust is gone from Heather. How integral is that in this movie?
I mean, that's a big part. We wanted to establish early on in the film that there was a dynamic with the three characters that, you know, there's a lot of joking at first, and Ed and I always said to each other, whenever we screened the film in front of an audience, if people were laughing at the jokes at the beginning, we knew we had them for the scares in the end. So it was really important for us to establish that there was a camaraderie at the very start of the film, and that they were taking it pretty lightheartedly going into the movie, and then things broke down. And so there are some film critics that said that this is a survival movie, more than a horror movie, that you're watching three people having to deal with a survival situation and how emotionally trying and traumatic that was, and how, you know, some people just can't deal with each other in those kinds of situations. So we wanted to convey that there was a sense of trauma and breakdown between what was normally sort of superficial kind of friendship, that really, when you're in that situation, things really broke down. And the actors portrayed it really well. I think they did a great job.
I'll let you hang on the mic. Can you guys
Sure.
hear me okay?
Yeah.
I usually don't have a problem with people hearing me. Like my wife oftentimes tells me how loud I am. So if you can't hear me in the back, let me know. I'll speak louder. Heather was really kind of the strong character in this until it came back to that wall again. And that's where we see the breakdown of her. Can you kind of talk about that part of the movie? Because I think that's where it kind of all starts to kind of fall apart, right? Especially for her.
Yeah, I mean, Heather Donahue, whom we cast for the film, I mean, originally it was supposed to be three guys in the movie. And when she came into the audition, I saw her first, and I saw something in her that was just really kind of unique and driven. And so we wanted someone that you would believe that would convince two other guys to go into the depths of the woods for this kind of fallacy, essentially. So she had to have a personality that was really strong, but naive at the same time. And Heather Donahue portrayed that balance really well. So she, at one point, that you can't argue with her because she's so driven, and it's her project, and you have to follow her because it's, you know, she's funding the whole thing, so you're sort of along for the ride. But there's a point where you have to kind of worry about your own safety. And Michael and Joshua were like, this is getting out of hand. So at what point in that process do you tell yourself, this is I'm done? You know, so we wanted to have a point in the movie where those guys were over it and things broke down. And that's sort of where it happened. We wanted to have this sense of conflict that couldn't ultimately be resolved, because it was a little bit of their internal conflict with each other, but also what outside was influencing it. You know, was it supernatural? Was it rednecks messing with those guys? What was really at work here, and that ambiguity I think worked for the movie ultimately, and that was what we were trying to convey.
Very good. So I'd like to open it up and take a couple of questions from the audience if you have any questions. All right, in the back, you're going to have to speak up though.
I got a question. What's your favorite parody?
The favorite parody? I have to say, I mean, there were a lot of parodies, but I grew up on Mad Magazine back in the day, and Mad Magazine had a parody, because I would always read Mad Magazine, and towards the end they'd always have the movie parodies. And then the one issue where they had the Blair Witch parody, I was called My Luck, which was my Say Cheese and My Luck was the two. But they did a cartoon parody of the movie, and I think that's when I knew we had arrived. It was the Mad Magazine parody, so I think it's my all-time favorite. There's a couple porn parodies, but those kind of don't count. Yeah, you didn't hear that too.
There was a question up front. Yes.
Is there a line in the movie that you're particularly partial to? And was it a line that was improv, or
Was there a line in the movie that I'm partial to? And was it improv? I mean, most of the lines were improv. I mean, we wrote a pretty detailed script for the film, almost hour to hour what the actors would be doing. But we wanted their dialogue to be pretty improvised, because we were trying to maintain this sense of realism. But I mean, there's so many moments that are special to me. I mean, certainly Heather's confessional, when she's talking to the camera and she's saying, you know, I can't see, and she's talking about how she can't process what's going on. That moment in the film that was one of those moments where I wrote the scene, but I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I knew we needed a confessional in that moment in the script, but we handed it off to Heather to really bring it to life. So when she came back from the field and had shot it the way she shot it and said it, the dialogue the way she said it, I think that's my favorite part of the movie. One of my favorite parts. Like that was a moment that I conceived this really great confessional moment, but it never turns out that way in a real movie. But she just rocked it. So I gotta say, dialogue and the moment and her, the way she pointed the camera, the visual, everything was just right on. The actual scene itself took like 15 minutes, and there's a lot more snot than you guys saw in the actual finished film. So we cut it down a lot, but I think that's probably my favorite moment in the movie.
So let's break away from Blair Witch for just a minute. I want to talk about some of your other work. Believers, Solstice, The Objective, Under the Bed, which I'm going to come back to that one here in a little bit. Skyman, which is going to be showing. Talk to me a little bit about, and your fans here, about your interest with sci-fi. Because I kind of have the same, I love horror, but sci-fi really gets to me. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is an amazing movie, I loved it. Talk to us about your interest with sci-fi.
I mean, I'm a big sci-fi fan from way back. I mean, I grew up on Isaac Asimov, and the Foundation series I think is getting made. Actually, I just read that Foundation Netflix is funding the Foundation series, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, I mean, I grew up on kind of classic sci-fi, and I loved horror growing up too. I mean, The Shining and Jacob's Ladder and The Omen, and I mean, it's one of my favorite films. I don't know if you guys remember a movie called It's Alive, which was, that's like the best one sheet in the world, man. Like, absolutely the best. But they've influenced all my work. I mean, the thing about a lot of the films I've done in the past, I guess if there's a common denominator, I like to try to take a different approach to a subject that, like Believers, for example, is like sort of a different approach to a cult movie. And Solstice is a different approach to like a ghost story. And I have a tendency to blend genres. There's, some would say my stuff is thriller, some would say it's sci-fi, some would say it's horror, but I don't really like think of a particular genre and say, this is the movie I'm writing for this particular genre. I write and direct for what moves me, but the common denominator is that it has cool characters, good dialogue, and that it's a real story. It's a human story. Skyman, which is going to be screening tomorrow, is a sci-fi docudrama, I guess, and there are some thriller elements to it, but it's a character-driven story about a guy that claims he saw an alien in the desert while camping with his father when he was 10, and now he's about to turn 40 and he thinks he's going to have a reunion with this alien, and I'm documenting his whole process, right? So that's sci-fi, but there's a little bit of horror in there, but it's a blend. So I love when movies do that. They're like, when I grew up on The Exorcist and The Omen and those things, I didn't think of those as horror films. I just thought them as good movies. They were just great films with great characters and great writing and great execution. So I guess, for better or worse, I'm not really pigeonholed. I don't think in that box, really.
Speaking of which, so when I was doing the research for our interview tonight, I came across a movie that I'd never heard of that you had done. A Lifetime movie, Under the Bed.
Right.
Now, it's not a horror movie, it's based on actual facts, but as a father of 2 daughters, it's a horror movie to me.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's happening. Can you talk about how that came about, how you ended up doing a movie for Lifetime Network, and a little bit about the movie?
Well, Under the Bed, a producer by the name of Richard Halpern came to me with this kind of news article that was done like years ago about a valet that stole a woman's keys at a restaurant. He was working at a restaurant, stole her keys when she checked in to go into the restaurant for lunch, and made a copy of her house key. And then moved in to her house and lived under her bed for like 4 days and watched her every move for 4 days. And eventually her boyfriend found out this freaking dude was under her bed. But I saw that as the inspiration to like an awesome kind of thriller. So my version of that was this guy was basically living in our house for a lot longer, and even, of course, modern day, like we have cell phones and smartphones, he's even texting her from under the bed. So she's sitting on her bed having this conversation with whom she thinks is an anonymous kind of admirer, and he's literally under the bed. So things go really dark and really bad. But yeah, A&E picked it up and premiered. This was like, I guess, 3 years ago or whatever. But it was a big premiere for them, and it did pretty well for them. And I even wrote a sequel script to that, so they might do a sequel to it. But it was called Under the Bed, and it was based on a true story, And since then, I've read about stories about like one guy who broke up with his girlfriend, lived in her attic. Instead of moving out, he lived in her attic for a year. It's like, where did he go to the bathroom? I don't know. But those are incredible stories, and those are based on real life events. So Under the Bed was inspired by a true story.
Go back out to the audience. Any other questions? Right front here.
Well, to kind of dovetail off of that, I guess, what are you more drawn to? Because the clearly, when you first came out, like you didn't have access to your, you could easily just snow sit and whatever, kind of spread like wildfire because of the real life draw to it and found footage nature of it, and then inspired by true events. So does that for you seem more scary because it could happen, or does the sci-fi scare you more?
Does real life or sci-fi scare me more? I mean, I think what I'm drawn to is that there's an overlap between real life and fantasy life, right? One of the things I love about sci-fi, no matter how fanciful it may be or otherworldly it may be, it really does speak to the human condition. Some of the best sci-fi that you read is making commentary on us as a species. That's what I love about it. So I think in my own modest way, I'm trying to do that in my own films, as I'm speaking to our own kind of human condition in a way, and maybe on a small, intimate level on some of these films. So some people have argued that Blair Witch was sort of a commentary on like the Iraq War, where we just kind of went in not knowing what the hell we were getting into and didn't respect what we were getting into, and we paid the price. So there's a lot of analogies to make from that. So I think, that's what filmmaking is to me. When films that really move me are allegories to real life, and sci-fi has always been that for me. And if I can have some overlap with horror and overlap, I've always felt that sci-fi and horror are kindred spirits in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of blend in my stuff with regards to that. I mean, the whole Alien series is a perfect example of a blend of horror and sci-fi together, done really well. And it is making that commentary. There's a lot of kind of social commentary in that. So, so in my own humble way, I guess I'm trying to do that because Tucker will attest that I'm always talking about politics and the human condition and what are we as a species? Well, we're weird little animals. We are, us human beings. So exploring that as a filmmaker is one of the really satisfying parts of this job. So I hope to be doing that forever, for better or worse. So. Yeah. Who's behind the camera in Blair Witch? Well, Neil Fredericks was our director of photography, who passed away years ago. Was a great DP, and he worked on several of my projects. So he was responsible for setting up the cameras, making sure the exposure was correct, and that we had two separate aesthetics going on. We had the video with the behind the scenes that constitutes most of the movie, and then we had the film, black and white stuff that was part of Heather's documentary, The Blair Witch. And so he was responsible for setting all that up, but the actual shooting was done by the actors themselves, because we wanted to make sure that it looked like that they were the documentarians doing the video. So, but we were shadowing them very closely every step of the way to make sure they were actually rolling film, because that would have been bad. But yeah, the video and the film that you see was all shot by them, basically. Yeah.
I know a lot of us watch movies and TV shows, and sometimes we get to a point where okay, there's no way much for this. In Blair Witch, was there a point where you said, I can only have them recording so much before it becomes obscene? Like how much they're recording?
Well, there was a big debate internally about at what point would they stop recording themselves, because I mean, look, you're in a survival situation, right? It's like, at what point do you say, I'm not going to record this anymore, I just need to worry about surviving. So we needed to write a little moment where, and you see it in the film, where Heather almost says, this takes me out of my reality. That looking through this lens removes me from what's happening in reality. And there's a point in the film where it stops becoming a project of hers and starts becoming a chronicling of their survival. Like, I got to continue rolling, or there's going to be no record of us. left. So that to me was viable for the audience. There's a point where, oh, I would buy that transition in her psychology, that she would continue rolling the camera. So, but it was a struggle. I mean, you know, one of those things that pulls an audience out of your movie is that they stop believing what you're doing. So we had to constantly like reassess the theory about what and why the camera will continue to be rolling. And there have been other attempts at found footage films that failed in that theory. I've seen where the camera's rolling on an intimate moment between two characters, and I'm thinking to myself, why would the camera be rolling? Nobody would be shooting this. And because they failed in that methodology as to, you've got to have an excuse to have that camera going. There has to be a viable reason for that camera to be rolling. So you can't treat that lightly in a found footage film. So we were very serious about how and why the camera would be rolling. We contrived reasons for it, but we made the reasons believable.
I remember that scene, and I think that's where Josh had the camera in her face, and he was giving her motivation.
Right.
It's funny, when that happened, I thought about the movie Body Double, where Jake Scully's in the hole, and Sam Bashard's shoveling dirt on him, and he's trying to get him to act because Jake Scully has this claustrophobic fear. And I immediately thought about what's your motivation, so I kind of went back to that.
Right.
But no, I agree. I think that we bought in the whole time that it would have been viable in that movie. So I have one final question for you. You and I were kind of talking about this earlier. Blair Witch was done on a budget somewhere between $20,000 and $60,000. I couldn't even get you to confess to me what the real budget was. There's a little bit of a range out there. There's some other great movies that have been done on inexpensive budgets. I have a list of them here. Night of the Living Dead, $114,000. Clerks, the great Kevin Smith movie, $27,500. Paranormal Activity, $15,000. But I did a little bit more research, and what I found was these sequels were nowhere close to these budgets. In fact, Halloween, after it was done for original, and it was $325,000, all of the sequels for that was anywhere from $2.5 to $17 million. Why is it that you have such a hard time when you have a movie like this that you can do on an inexpensive budget? Why is it so hard to do that sequel? And I know you talked to NME earlier this year about a sequel to Blair Witch, how you would actually present it to Lionsgate on that. Can you kind of talk to us? Because I know there's a lot of directors out here in this audience who probably would love to hear that from your perspective.
Well, I mean, look, the first film you do is arguably the one you have the most creative freedom on, because there's nobody breathing down your neck. You have no studio, clamoring for a release date. It's friends and family that are financing your project, and so you're beholden to just your inner circle to get the movie done. Friends are donating their time, so things aren't costing what they would be at book rate, whatnot. So you're able to get things done a lot cheaper than if you were a quote-unquote professional down the road. So there is that, but the problem that I found personally in my own experience with when the studios sort of step in and they see something that you've struck gold, or you have lightning in a bottle with your first movie, is they think they can duplicate that by just throwing more at it. And they don't fundamentally understand what made the first one work. And part of what made the first one work is that it was done with an honesty and authenticity and the time, frankly, for it to organically materialize. And Hollywood is not set up to let things organically materialize. If you're a creative, if you're a writer, a filmmaker, part of what makes something, a piece of art, really good is actually time away from it. You got to step away and give it time to breathe. Give your brain time to kind of reconnoiter, and inspiration will come to you in the most inopportune ways. And when you come back, you'll look at your work anew. And Hollywood is not set up for that. They've got deadlines. They need you to, pump stuff out, and they think throwing more money at it will solve that problem. And it doesn't. It never solves that issue. Good art takes time to gestate. It just does. It's just the way it is. Because you can't rush a baby to birth. It takes time. So, as with Blair Witch, they wanted to kind of rush something out right after the first one. And we tried to kind of tell them that they were making it for all the wrong reasons, which is not uncommon in Hollywood. But I think that's, my takeaway from sequels to these kind of inspired first films is that they just don't understand that process. They don't understand fundamentally the creative process is something that can't be rushed. So they try to rush it, and they think throwing more money at it will do it, and it often does just the opposite.
Yeah, I noticed like a lot of the box office revenues were actually lower for sequels than the original. Even though the budget was higher, the revenues that came in for a lot of these movies were a lot lower. And oftentimes only 2 or 3 of the sequels made them higher in box office revenues. So I think that's very interesting what you say about how your character creativity in your first movie.
Yeah, and look, they try to they get lightning in a bottle, or they see something that's inspired, or whether it's a musician or a filmmaker or an artist in whatever form, and they see something that's special, and they try to package it, and they try to form an logarithm from it, and then think we can duplicate this, and it's just not the way our brains are wired, look, the film business is what it is. It's a business, and a lot of us are creatives, and we have to work within the parameters of the business. We need their money to make our movies, and they need our movies to make their money. It's an unholy marriage. It just is. But never, ever forget the fundamental fact that they need us more than we need them. Without us, there is no business. Without them, we'll still be making movies. Right? So I'll end on that.
I think that's great. So thank you very much. So Dan has graciously agreed to stick around, sign some of the posters if you have them, answer any questions. Do you want his autograph? Do you have a question, Tucker?
Actually, I think I do.
Okay, stand up. We're going to help you. Yeah, here we go. I actually wanted to ask him, but I said, no, I'm going to respect Dan and not ask his son, but now he's volunteered, so I'm jumping on that.
Well, I guess for the part where they walk down the stairs at the very end of the movie, right? Holding the camera.
Well, the camera at the end, holding the camera, that's Heather.
Heather?
Yes. She's holding the
No,
camera.
it's like,
And then she gets hit at the end.
yeah, she gets hit.
Yeah. So, good
Yeah, I was
question.
thinking they could have done whatever.
The ghost. There, ghost. It's actually an alien. Just
All right, so we'll let you come and do that. I want to remind everybody that tomorrow we're at the Egyptian. We start at 5 o'clock. I will be there to kick it off, and hopefully I'll see all of you there. The blocks go, I think the last block starts at midnight. There are some great films tomorrow. I've learned I don't call them movies anymore. The first year I did, Brian's in the back shaking his head. The first year I did it, I was on stage and I called them movies, and somebody kind of nudged me later and said they're films. So I've learned to call them films. But this is a wonderful opportunity. I'm honored to be back for the 4th year to work with Molly and Susan and the crew. I've made a lot of friends through this, and this has been amazing. And to be able to say I'm Facebook friends with Dan Myrick, I mean, come on. Dude, that's pretty damn cool.
So, but we'll be back tomorrow at the Egyptian, Friday and Saturday, so we hope to see everybody there. We're going to have a great time. This year is going to be amazing. There are a ton of great films. Skyman, Hickman Model, Satanic Panic, The Tent, the world premiere of The Tent, right? I can't say that enough. That's going to be amazing. You don't want to miss that. So we're going to have a great time. So we'll see you all then. Thank you for coming out and supporting it. Tell your friends to come too. Please support the Idaho Horror Contest. Dan, thank you again.